Something unprecedented is unfolding across the highways and neighborhoods of America's most populous state, and the implications extend far beyond California's borders. Fuel stations that have served communities for decades are shuttering their pumps permanently. These are not temporary closures due to maintenance or supply chain hiccups. These are final goodbyes, padlocked doors, and decommissioned underground tanks that will never again dispense a single gallon of gasoline. What we are witnessing is the collision between ambitious policy objectives and the unforgiving mathematics of energy infrastructure, and the consequences are rippling through the lives of millions of ordinary citizens who simply need to get to work. The governor of California has stepped before cameras in recent weeks, visibly frustrated, pointing fingers at oil companies, fuel distributors, and station operators. Accusations of price gouging have filled the airwaves. Threats of investigations and penalties have been issued with increasing urgency. Yet beneath the political theater lies a fundamental truth that no amount of rhetoric can alter. You cannot regulate your way out of a supply crisis, you cannot legislate gasoline into existence, and you cannot protect consumers from scarcity when the very policies you champion have systematically dismantled the infrastructure upon which that supply depends. To comprehend how California arrived at this precarious juncture, we must first understand what makes the state's fuel market uniquely vulnerable. Unlike virtually every other region of the United States, California operates as what energy analysts describe as an isolated fuel market. There are no major pipelines connecting the state to the vast refining complexes along the Gulf Coast. There are no easy overland routes through which gasoline can flow from neighboring states during times of shortage, geography, federal environmental regulations, and infrastructure decisions made generations ago have combined to create a situation where nearly all gasoline consumed within California must either be produced within its own borders or arrive aboard ocean-going tankers after journeys spanning thousands of miles. The isolation runs even deeper. California mandates a specialized gasoline formulation known as CARB gasoline, named for the California Air Resources Board that established its specifications. This blend is engineered to burn cleaner and reduce harmful emissions, a worthy environmental objective. However, the formula is substantially more complex and costly to manufacture than conventional gasoline. Only a select handful of refineries worldwide possess the equipment and expertise to produce it. This means that when California faces a supply disruption, the state cannot simply pick up the phone and order fuel from Texas or Louisiana. The specialized product must come from facilities specifically configured to make it, and those facilities are becoming increasingly scarce. 2 decades ago, California operated more than 30 oil refineries. By 2010, that number had declined to the mid-20s. By 2020, approximately 20 facilities remained operational. Today, after accounting for closures, conversions, and capacity reductions, the state has roughly 15 active refineries producing gasoline. Just within the past few years, California has lost several 100,000 barrels per day of refining capacity. The Marathon refinery in Martinez ceased gasoline production and converted to renewable diesel operations. Phillips 66 made a similar transition at its Rodeo facility. Other refineries have scaled back output or publicly questioned whether continued operations in California make economic sense. Each of these transitions was announced with fanfare as environmental progress, cleaner fuels, reduced carbon emissions, a bold step toward a petroleum-free future. What went largely unmentioned in these celebratory press releases was a stubborn and inconvenient fact. California still consumes between 13 and 15 billion gallons of gasoline every single year. That demand has not evaporated. When refinery capacity disappears, the fuel must come from somewhere else. Initially, the system adapted with surprising resilience. Gasoline imports from Asian refineries increased steadily. Tankers arriving from South Korea, Singapore, and occasionally Middle Eastern ports became more frequent visitors to California's deepwater terminals. Prices crept upward, but the increases were gradual enough to be dismissed as normal market fluctuations. Consumers grumbled at the pump but continued filling their tanks. Then the situation began deteriorating more rapidly. Throughout 2023 and 2024, multiple California refineries experienced unplanned shutdowns, equipment failures at aging facilities, fires that required extended repairs, maintenance periods that stretched far longer than anticipated. These were not deliberate actions by malevolent corporations seeking to squeeze consumers. They were the predictable consequences of infrastructure operating under increasingly stringent regulations while facing tighter profit margins and reduced investment. Each time a refinery went offline, wholesale gasoline prices surged almost instantaneously. The mechanism is straightforward. When supply is constrained and demand remains constant, even minor disruptions trigger significant price increases. This is fundamental market economics, not conspiracy or manipulation. The cascading effects are now reaching the retail level with devastating consequences. Most fuel station operators function on extraordinarily thin profit margins, often earning just pennies per gallon sold. Their business model depends on high volume and supplementary revenue from convenience store sales. When wholesale prices fluctuate wildly and unpredictably, station owners face an impossible choice. They can raise retail prices immediately to match their rising costs, alienating price-sensitive customers, or they can sell fuel at a loss, hemorrhaging money with every transaction. In communities across California, particularly in rural areas and lower-income urban neighborhoods, station owners lack the financial reserves to absorb this volatility. The mathematics simply do not work, so they close permanently, padlock the pumps, and walk away from businesses their families may have operated for generations. Industry associations have spent the past 12 months warning state officials that this moment was approaching. Compliance costs were becoming unbearable, price volatility was destroying business planning, declining fuel sales as some consumers transitioned to electric vehicles were eroding the volume that made thin margins survivable. These warnings were frequently dismissed as exaggeration, self-interested pleading from an industry seeking to avoid accountability. Now the closures are occurring exactly as predicted, and officials appear genuinely surprised. The governor's public frustration reveals a troubling disconnect between policy ambition and physical reality. There have been calls for investigations, emergency interventions, and potential penalties for what officials characterize as unfair pricing practices. But regulation cannot conjure supply from thin air. Price caps cannot produce a single additional gallon of gasoline. Hearings and press conferences generate headlines but not fuel. In fact, such interventions often accelerate the very outcomes they seek to prevent when companies operate in environments where profit margins are restricted. By fiat, where costs are rising due to regulations beyond their control, and where political risk makes long-term planning hazardous, they reduce investment, they scale back operations, they exit the market entirely. We have already witnessed what market exit looks like, and the trajectory is accelerating as California's domestic refining capacity shrinks. The state becomes increasingly dependent on imported fuel. These imports travel thousands of miles aboard vessels burning heavy fuel oil. Transit times can stretch to several weeks. Shipments are vulnerable to global events entirely beyond California's control. A disruption in Asian shipping lanes, a refinery problem in South Korea, severe weather across specific trade routes, a geopolitical crisis affecting tanker traffic. Any of these scenarios can trigger sudden and dramatic price spikes in Los Angeles, San Diego, and San Francisco. This vulnerability is not theoretical. It is manifesting with increasing frequency. Energy industry analysis indicates that California now imports between 200,000 and 400,000 barrels per day of gasoline and blending components during peak demand periods. This volume has increased substantially in recent years. Imported gasoline almost invariably costs more than domestically refined fuel, and the premium reflects transportation costs, currency fluctuations, and the leverage that foreign suppliers hold over a captive market. For California residents, the implications are immediate and painful. Drivers across the state paid between $1.50 and $2 more per gallon than the national average throughout 2024. For a household driving 15,000 miles annually, this translates to an additional $600 to $1,000 per year simply to maintain basic transportation. For small businesses, delivery services, contractors, and commercial trucking operations, the financial burden is substantially worse. Higher fuel costs permeate the entire economy. Groceries become more expensive as transportation costs rise. Service providers increase their rates. Shipping expenses climb. Consumers ultimately bear these costs whether they drive gasoline vehicles or not. We have arrived at what economists describe as a point of no return, a threshold beyond which reversal becomes extraordinarily difficult. Once a refinery closes or converts to alternative products, it almost never returns to gasoline production. Operating permits expire. Specialized equipment is dismantled or sold. Highly trained workers disperse to other industries and other states. Restarting a shuttered refinery is not a matter of flipping switches. It requires years of planning, regulatory approval, and billions of dollars in capital investment. The same principle applies to retail infrastructure. When a gas station closes permanently, underground storage tanks are typically decommissioned according to strict environmental protocols. Cleanup may be required if contamination is detected. The property is often redeveloped for entirely different purposes. That fueling infrastructure is lost forever, even if policymakers decided tomorrow that prices had become unacceptably high and supply had become dangerously inadequate. The physical infrastructure required to increase that supply may no longer exist. The capacity has been dismantled, the expertise has scattered, the investment has fled to more hospitable regulatory environments. Consider the fundamental contradiction embedded in California's current trajectory. The state is aggressively promoting electric vehicle adoption, offering incentives, mandating sales quotas, and envisioning a future free from internal combustion engines. At the same time, millions of residents remain entirely dependent on gasoline for their daily transportation. The transition to electric vehicles is real, but it is unfolding gradually over many years. During this extended transition period, gasoline supply must remain stable, adequate, and reasonably priced. Instead, what we observe is supply declining substantially faster than demand, with entirely predictable consequences. Policies appear designed as if gasoline consumption will disappear tomorrow. It will not. California EV's fleet includes tens of millions of gasoline-powered vehicles that will remain on roads for years and even decades to come. When supply contracts more rapidly than demand, prices rise sharply. This is not speculation or corporate greed. It is the same immutable economic principle that governs housing, food, and every other commodity market. Multiple energy economists have noted that California now operates with some of the tightest fuel supply margins anywhere in the developed world. The system possesses virtually no buffer capacity to absorb unexpected disruptions. The broader implications extend far beyond California's borders. Arizona, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington all depend to varying degrees on West Coast refining capacity. When California experiences supply problems, neighboring states frequently feel the effects through price increases and occasional shortages. On a national level, California's predicament serves as a cautionary example of what happens when energy policy ambitions outpace infrastructure reality. Fuel systems are physical infrastructure. They do not respond to political messaging or legislative mandates. They require sustained investment, consistent maintenance, and stable regulatory frameworks that allow long-term planning. California has created conditions where companies are reluctant to invest in gasoline infrastructure because the regulatory environment signals that such investments are unwelcome. Yet consumers still need gasoline today, and they will need it tomorrow, and they will need it for years to come. This contradiction does not resolve itself smoothly. It resolves through higher prices, reduced availability, and increasing hardship for those least able to afford alternatives. The real questions now are how much higher prices will climb and how many more stations will close before policymakers acknowledge that adequate supply matters as much as aspirational intentions. California's experience today may well preview what awaits other regions when energy policy and physical reality diverge so dramatically.